The Velthari had practiced their sacred matching ceremony for more than 10,000 years, and in all that time, not a single cub had ever been left without a guardian. The ceremony was perfect, the elders claimed, blessed by the Ancient Ones, who had first built the great DNA scanners that determined the fate of every child born into their proud civilization. On the orbital station known as Sanctuary 7, dozens of alien species lived together in an uneasy peace, sharing corridors and trading goods and trying their best not to start another war. The humans had arrived 3 decades ago, establishing their diplomatic corps and medical stations, and they had earned a reputation as the galaxy's most stubborn negotiators and most compassionate healers. Commander Daniel Harris stood on the observation deck above the ceremonial chamber, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the Velthari elders prepare for the day's ceremony. He was 42 years old, with graying hair at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too many conflicts, too many refugees, too many children lost to the endless wars that plagued the outer colonies. "You seem tense," said Lieutenant Lisa Monroe, stepping up beside him with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She was younger than Daniel by 15 years, with sharp features and an even sharper mind that had made her invaluable during the station's most difficult diplomatic crises. Daniel accepted the coffee with a grateful nod and took a long sip before answering. "I have read the reports on what happens to Velthari cubs who fail the matching ceremony," he said quietly, "and I cannot stop thinking about it." Lisa's expression darkened as she understood what he meant. The Velthari believed that genetic compatibility determined everything about a person's worth, their place in society, their right to exist. A cub without a match was considered corrupted, cursed, unworthy of love or protection, or even a name. "It has never happened," Lisa reminded him, "not once in their entire recorded history. Every cub has always found a match." "There is a first time for everything," Daniel replied, and he did not know why those words felt so heavy on his tongue. Below them, the ceremonial chamber had filled with Velthari families, their silver and gold fur gleaming under the soft lights. The adults wore traditional robes of deep blue, and the cubs who would be matched today sat in a row on cushioned benches, their small faces bright with excitement and nervousness. Daniel counted 7 cubs waiting for their turn, but his eyes kept returning to the smallest one at the end of the row. She was a tiny thing with silver fur that seemed almost white in certain light, and her amber eyes were too large for her face, giving her an expression of perpetual wonder. Unlike the other cubs who chattered and fidgeted, she sat perfectly still, watching everything with an intensity that made Daniel's chest tighten. "That one," he said softly, pointing toward the silver cub. "What do you know about her?" Lisa consulted her datapad and frowned. "Her name is Kira. She is 6 cycles old, which is roughly equivalent to 5 human years. Her mother died during the Scourge invasion of their homeworld, and her father is listed as unknown. She has been living in the refugee quarters since the Velthari arrived on this station 2 years ago." "An orphan," Daniel murmured. "Technically, yes," Lisa agreed, "but the Velthari do not recognize orphans the way humans do. To them, a cub belongs to whoever the scanner matches them with, not to their biological parents. Kira's mother was matched with her when she was born, but since her mother died, the scanner will simply find a new match for her today." Daniel watched as the first cub was led to the scanner, a large golden-furred boy who practically bounced with excitement. The machine hummed and glowed, analyzing the cub's genetic code and comparing it against every adult Velthari in the database. Within seconds, the screen displayed a name, and a tall female in the crowd stepped forward, with tears of joy streaming down her face. The ceremony continued, one cub after another finding their perfect match. The chamber filled with sounds of celebration, as families were formed, as children found the guardians, who would raise them and teach them and love them according to the ancient traditions. But Daniel could not stop watching Kira. She remained motionless through each matching, her amber eyes following the proceedings with that same unsettling intensity. When the cub beside her was called forward and matched with a gentle-looking male, Kira did not react at all. She simply waited, patient and quiet, as if she already knew what was coming. Finally, her name was called. High Matriarch Selvra, the eldest of the Valthari elders and the keeper of their traditions, gestured for Kira to approach the scanner. The old female's fur had gone completely white with age, and she walked with a staff that clicked against the metal floor with each step. Her eyes were cold and hard, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and forgiven too little. Kira rose from her bench and walked toward the scanner with slow, measured steps. She was so small that she barely reached the machine's lowest panel, and an attendant had to lift her onto a platform so the scanner could read her properly. The machine hummed to life, blue light washing over Kira's silver fur. Daniel found himself holding his breath, though he could not explain why. Beside him, Lisa had gone still as well, her coffee forgotten in her hands. The scanner beeped once, twice, 3 times. And then the screen displayed a message that no Valthari had ever seen before. Words that should have been impossible according to everything their civilization believed. No match found. The chamber fell silent. Daniel felt the words hit him like a physical blow, even though he did not fully understand what they meant. He watched as the joy drained from the faces of the Valthari adults, replaced by horror and disgust. He watched as the other cubs shrank away from Kira as if she carried some terrible disease. But most of all, he watched Kira. The little cub stood perfectly still on her platform, her amber eyes moving slowly across the crowd. She looked at each face in turn, searching for something, hoping for something, and finding only rejection and fear. The adults who had smiled at her moments ago now refused to meet her gaze. The elders who were supposed to protect her stepped backward as if she might contaminate them. And still, she did not cry. High Matriarch Selvra was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The scanner has declared its judgment," she announced, and there was no warmth in her words, no compassion, nothing but cold certainty. "This cub carries corrupted blood. She is no daughter of Velthar. She belongs to no one." Daniel's hands tightened on the railing of the observation deck. "This is wrong," he whispered. Lisa touched his arm gently. "It is their tradition," she said, but her voice wavered. "We cannot interfere." Below them, the elders were already moving toward Kira, ready to lead her away to the unclaimed quarters where rejected children spent their lives in isolation. Daniel had seen those quarters once, during a routine inspection, and the memory still haunted him. Empty rooms, silent corridors, children who had forgotten how to smile. He looked at Kira one more time, and in that moment, her amber eyes lifted and met his through the observation window. Something passed between them, something that Daniel could not name or explain. It was not words or thoughts, but something deeper, something ancient. He felt it in his bones, in his blood, in the very core of his being. And he knew with absolute certainty that this was not over. The silence in the ceremonial chamber lasted only a few heartbeats before it shattered into chaos. Voices rose from every corner as the Valtari adults argued and shouted, some demanding explanations from the elders, while others simply gathered their newly matched cubs and fled, as if Kira's presence might somehow taint their families. High Matriarch Selvra raised her staff and struck it against the floor 3 times, the sharp sound cutting through the noise like thunder. "Silence," she commanded, and though her voice was not loud, it carried the weight of 10,000 years of tradition. The crowd obeyed instantly. Kira remained on the platform beside the scanner, her small body rigid with tension. She had still not cried, had still not spoken, but Daniel could see her paws trembling slightly at her sides. She was trying so hard to be brave, and that simple fact broke his heart. The scanner has never failed, Selvra declared, addressing the crowd with her cold, measured voice. It was built by the Ancient Ones, blessed by the spirits of our ancestors, perfected over countless generations. If it declares that this cub has no match, then we must accept that truth no matter how painful it may be. A younger elder stepped forward, a male with gray-streaked fur and worried eyes. High Matriarch, perhaps the machine made an error. Perhaps we should run the scan again. Selvra turned her gaze upon him, and the younger elder visibly flinched. The scanner does not make errors, she said flatly. To suggest otherwise is to question the very foundation of our civilization. Do you wish to do that, Elder Torvak? Torvak lowered his head in submission. No, High Matriarch. Forgive me. Daniel watched this exchange with growing anger. He had dealt with stubborn traditions before, had navigated the complex politics of a dozen different species, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The Velthari were so devoted to their machine, so certain of its infallibility, that they would rather abandon a child than admit the possibility of a mistake. What happens now? He asked Lisa quietly. Lisa's expression was grim as she consulted her datapad. According to Velthari law, a cub without a match is classified as unclaimed. She will be taken to the isolation quarters and given basic care until she reaches maturity, at which point she will be released to find her own way in the galaxy. Basic care, Daniel repeated, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. What does that mean exactly? Food, shelter, medical attention if absolutely necessary, Lisa replied, but no education, no socialization, no affection. The unclaimed are not supposed to exist, so the Velthari have never developed any system for actually caring for them. Kira will be kept alive, but she will not be allowed to live. Daniel felt something dark and heavy settle in his chest. He had fought in wars, had watched friends die in his arms, had made impossible decisions that haunted him to this day. But nothing had ever filled him with quite this much rage. Below, the elders had begun to move toward Kira. Two of them reached for her arms, ready to escort her from the chamber and into her new life of isolation and neglect. The little cub did not resist, but she did not cooperate either. She simply stood there, her amber eyes still scanning the crowd, still searching for something. She is looking for someone to save her, Lisa said softly, and Daniel could hear the tears in her voice, even though her face remained composed. I know, Daniel replied. He watched as the elders took Kira's paws and began to lead her toward the exit. The crowd parted before them, the Velthari adults pulling their own cubs close as if protecting them from some invisible threat. No one spoke to Kira. No one looked at her. No one acknowledged her existence except to avoid her. But just before she reached the door, Kira stopped. The elders tried to pull her forward, but she planted her small feet and refused to move. Her silver fur bristled, and her ears flattened against her skull. Something had changed in her posture. Something had shifted in her eyes. She had caught a scent. Daniel did not understand what was happening at first. He watched as Kira's head turned slowly, her nostrils flaring, her entire body trembling with sudden intensity. She was tracking something, following some invisible trail through the air that only she could perceive. And then her amber eyes locked onto the observation window, onto him. Commander, Lisa said urgently, but Daniel barely heard her. He was caught in Kira's gaze, frozen by the desperate hope he saw there. This tiny cub who had been told she was worthless, who had been rejected by her entire species, was looking at him as if he were the only thing in the universe that mattered. Kira pulled free from the elders with a strength that should have been impossible for someone so small. She sprinted across the ceremonial chamber, her paws slapping against the metal floor, her silver fur streaming behind her like a banner. The Velthari guards shouted and gave chase, but she was too fast, too determined. She crashed through the door to the observation deck and skidded to a halt directly in front of Daniel Harris. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Daniel looked down at the cub, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with questions he did not know how to ask. Kira looked up at him, her amber eyes wide and bright, her small chest heaving from exertion. "You," she said in broken common tongue, the words rough and unpracticed, but unmistakably clear. "You smell like safety." Daniel felt something crack inside him, some wall he had built around his heart over years of loss and loneliness. He had never wanted children of his own, had never thought himself capable of being a parent. His life was the military, the station, the endless work of maintaining peace in a galaxy that seemed determined to tear itself apart. But looking at this cub, this tiny silver creature who had chosen him out of everyone in the crowd, he understood that none of that mattered. The Velthari guards burst through the door moments later, followed by several elders, and finally High Matriarch Selvra herself. The old female's face was twisted with outrage, her white fur bristling, her staff clutched in trembling paws. "Human," she said, and the word sounded like a curse. "Step away from that creature. She is unclaimed. She has no right to approach you, no right to choose anything." Daniel did not move. He could feel Kira pressing against his leg, her small paws gripping the fabric of his uniform. He could feel her trembling, though whether from fear or exhaustion or something else entirely, he could not tell. "With respect, High Matriarch," he said carefully. "She did not approach me. She ran to me. There is a difference." Selvra's eyes narrowed. "There is no difference. She is property of the Velthari state now, to be disposed of according to our traditions. Your species has no authority in this matter." Lisa stepped forward, her datapad in hand. "Actually, High Matriarch, I believe there may be some legal questions we need to address. The station operates under Galactic Compact law, which has provisions regarding the treatment of minors that may apply here." "This is an internal Velthari matter," Selvra insisted. "Your compact has no jurisdiction over our traditions." Daniel looked down at Kira, who had buried her face against his leg. He could feel the warmth of her small body, the rapid beating of her heart. She had stopped trembling and gone completely still, as if she believed that staying quiet might somehow make her invisible. "She chose me," Daniel said quietly. "Does that not mean anything in your traditions?" Selvra's laugh was harsh and cold. "She is an unclaimed cub. She has no right to choose. The scanner determines worth, human, not the whims of a corrupted child. Now step aside, or there will be consequences." Daniel met the High Matriarch's gaze and held it. He had faced down pirates and warlords and hostile alien commanders. He had stared death in the face more times than he could count. This elderly Velthari, for all her authority and tradition, did not frighten him. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge, like a declaration of war. The standoff on the observation deck lasted for what felt like hours, though in truth it was only minutes. Daniel stood his ground, with Kira pressed against his leg, while High Matriarch Selvra glared at him with eyes that burned with cold fury. The Velthari guards shifted nervously, unsure whether they were supposed to intervene or wait for orders. "You do not understand what you are doing, human," Selvra said at last, her voice low and dangerous. "This cub is not some abandoned pet for you to adopt. She is a Velthari, bound by Velthari law, subject to Velthari tradition. By interfering, you are committing an act of aggression against our entire species." Daniel felt the weight of her words, understood the threat hidden within them. The Velthari were not a powerful species militarily, but they had allies, connections, influence in the Galactic Council. A diplomatic incident here could have consequences far beyond this single station. "I am not trying to start a war," he said carefully. "I am trying to protect a child." "That thing is not a child," Selvra snapped, and her voice cracked with genuine disgust. "It is an abomination, a corruption of our bloodline, a mistake that should never have been allowed to exist. The scanner has shown us the truth of its nature, and we will act accordingly." Kira flinched at the word thing, and Daniel felt his anger surge. He had been patient, had tried to remain diplomatic, but there were limits to what he could tolerate. "Her name is Kira," he said firmly, "and she is standing right here, listening to every word you say. Whatever she may be according to your traditions, she is still a living being with feelings and thoughts and hopes. Does that not matter to you at all?" Something flickered in Selvra's eyes, something that might have been doubt or shame, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Sentiment is a weakness, Commander. It clouds judgment and leads to poor decisions. The Ancient Ones understood this, which is why they created the scanner. Emotions lie, but genetics never do." Lisa stepped forward again, her datapad held up like a shield. "High Matriarch, I have been reviewing the relevant treaties, and I believe there may be grounds for—" "Enough," Selvra interrupted. "I will not stand here debating with humans while that creature continues to contaminate this sacred space. Guards, take the cub and escort these outsiders from the ceremonial chamber. We will continue this discussion through proper diplomatic channels." The guards moved forward hesitantly, their paws reaching for Kira. Daniel tensed, ready to intervene, but before he could act, something unexpected happened. Kira stepped away from him. The little cub walked toward the guards with slow, deliberate steps, her amber eyes calm and steady. The guards stopped, confused by her sudden compliance. Selvra watched with narrow eyes, suspicious, but waiting to see what would happen. Kira walked past the guards without acknowledging them. She walked through the door to the observation deck and back into the ceremonial chamber below. Daniel followed immediately, pushing past the Velthari, with Lisa close behind him. The crowd that had gathered earlier was still there, watching the drama unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. They parted before Kira as she walked, leaving a wide path as if afraid to touch her. The little cub paid them no attention. She walked straight to the DNA scanner. The machine stood in the center of the chamber, ancient and imposing, its screens dark after the failed matching ceremony. It was covered in intricate carvings that depicted the history of the Velthari people, their greatest achievements, their most sacred beliefs. To the Velthari, this scanner was not just a tool, but a temple, a physical manifestation of everything they held dear. Kira stopped in front of it and stared at the darkened screen for a long moment. Her reflection gazed back at her, a small silver cub with amber eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "Kira," Daniel called out, unsure what she was planning. "Whatever you are thinking." "It said I belong to no one," Kira interrupted, her voice small but clear. "It said I am worth nothing. It said I have no family, no home, no future." The crowd watched in silence as the little cub turned to face them. She looked at the elders who had condemned her, at the families who had rejected her, at the children who had been taught to fear her. "But I do not believe it," she said. And then she turned back to the scanner, raised her small paw and smashed it into the display screen with all the strength her tiny body could muster. The glass shattered with a sound like breaking worlds. Sparks flew from the damaged circuitry. The ancient machine let out a dying whine that echoed through the chamber like a scream. Fragments of the sacred carvings crumbled and fell to the floor. The Velthari erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air as adults rushed forward, some trying to reach the scanner, others trying to grab Kira. Guards drew their weapons, but seemed unsure whether to aim them at a child. Elders shouted contradictory orders, while families fled toward the exits. But through all the noise and confusion, Kira remained perfectly calm. She walked away from the destroyed scanner, her paw bleeding slightly from the broken glass, and made her way back to where Daniel stood frozen in shock. She took his hand in her small, bloody paw and held it tightly, Then she turned to face High Matriarch Selvra, who had finally pushed through the crowd, her white fur wild, and her eyes blazing with a fury that bordered on madness. "I do not need a machine to tell me where I belong," Kira said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent chamber. "I do not need your traditions, or your scanners, or your approval. I know who I am, and I know what I want." She looked up at Daniel with those ancient amber eyes. "I choose him," she declared. "He is my family now." Selvra's staff trembled in her paws. "You cannot do this," she whispered, and for the first time there was fear in her voice. "You have destroyed something sacred, something irreplaceable. Do you understand what you have done?" Kira met the High Matriarch's gaze without flinching. "I have freed myself," she said simply. Daniel squeezed her paw gently, feeling the warmth of her blood mixing with the warmth of her small fingers. He did not know what the future held, did not know how they would navigate the political storm that was surely coming, did not know if he was capable of being the parent this cub so desperately needed. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a child had made a choice, had claimed her own worth in the face of a tradition that would have erased her, had chosen him as her family when no one else would have her. And he was not going to let her down. "We need to leave," Lisa said urgently, grabbing Daniel's arm. "The crowd is turning hostile, and I do not think the guards will be able to maintain order much longer." Daniel nodded and scooped Kira into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. This tiny creature who had just shattered 10,000 years of tradition with a single act of defiance. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "Hold on tight," he told her. They ran. Behind them, the ceremonial chamber descended into chaos. The Velthari argued and wept and raged at the destruction of their most sacred artifact. High Matriarch Selvra screamed orders that no one followed. And somewhere in the crowd, a few individuals watched the fleeing humans with something other than anger in their eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. But Daniel did not see any of that. He was focused only on the weight of the cub in his arms, the feel of her heartbeat against his chest, the knowledge that from this moment forward, his life would never be the same. He had not asked for this. He had not wanted this. But, as he carried Kira through the corridors of Sanctuary 7 toward the uncertain future that awaited them, he realized that he would not trade this feeling for anything in the galaxy. For the first time, in a very long time, Daniel Harris had something to fight for. And he intended to win. The days that followed the destruction of the scanner were the most difficult of Daniel's life. He had faced combat situations that lasted weeks, diplomatic crises that dragged on for months, but nothing had prepared him for the relentless pressure of fighting for a child against an entire civilization. The Velthari demanded immediate justice. They wanted Kira returned to their custody for judgment, wanted Daniel stripped of his rank and expelled from the station, wanted the humans to acknowledge that they had committed an act of war against Velthari culture. Their ambassador delivered formal complaints every morning, each one more threatening than the last. Station Administrator Patricia Cole, a stern woman with iron-gray hair and a reputation for fairness, called an emergency meeting of the council on the third day. Representatives from 12 different species crowded into the main conference room, their voices overlapping as they argued about jurisdiction, tradition, and the rights of children. Daniel sat at one end of the long table, with Lisa beside him. Kira was not allowed in the meeting, so she waited in his quarters, under the watchful eye of a human medical officer named Kate, who had volunteered to help. The little cub had barely spoken since the incident, spending most of her time curled up in a corner, but she always watched the door, waiting for Daniel to return. "Let me be clear about the Velthari position," Ambassador Resk declared, his golden fur bristling with barely contained anger. "This human has committed a crime against our most sacred traditions. The cub destroyed an artifact that was older than human civilization itself. We demand that both be handed over for trial under Velthari law. The cub is 5 years old, Lisa responded firmly. Under Galactic Compact regulations, minors cannot be held criminally responsible for their actions. As for Commander Harris, he did nothing except stand in one place while a child ran to him. That is hardly a crime. He encouraged her defiance, Resk insisted. He refused to step aside when ordered by High Matriarch Selvra. His presence inspired the cub to commit this atrocity. Administrator Cole raised her hand for silence. We are not here to assign blame, she said. We are here to determine what happens next. The cub is currently in human custody, and the Velthari want her returned. Do we have any legal framework for making this decision? Lisa pulled up a file on her datapad and projected it onto the main screen. I have been researching this issue extensively, and I believe I have found something relevant. Article 7 of the Galactic Compact, Section 12, deals with asylum provisions for refugees. The room fell quiet as the representatives studied the text. Daniel watched their faces, trying to gauge their reactions. Some looked intrigued, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. The asylum clause was written 200 years ago, Lisa explained. It was intended to protect refugees who fled persecution based on their species, their beliefs, or their genetic makeup. It allows any sentient being to claim asylum with a willing guardian of another species, if returning to their original society would result in demonstrable harm. Ambassador Resk made a dismissive gesture. That clause has never been used for a child. It was meant for adult political dissidents and criminals seeking to escape justice. The text does not specify age requirements, Lisa countered. She was rejected by her society based solely on her genetic makeup, something she has no control over. If returned to Velthari custody, she will be placed in isolation quarters and denied education, socialization, and affection until she reaches adulthood. If that is not demonstrable harm, I do not know what is. The debate continued for hours. Representatives argued about precedent and interpretation, about cultural sensitivity and universal rights, about the dangers of interfering with alien traditions, and the responsibilities of a civilized galaxy. Daniel listened to all of it, his fists clenched under the table, his patience wearing thinner with every passing minute. Finally, Administrator Cole called for a recess. Daniel practically ran back to his quarters, desperate to check on Kira and reassure her that everything would be all right. He found her exactly where he had left her, curled up in the corner with her silver fur wrapped around her like a blanket. Kate sat nearby, reading a datapad, and she looked up with concern when Daniel entered. She has not moved in hours, Kate reported quietly. She drank some water when I offered it, but she refused to eat anything. I think she is waiting for you. Daniel knelt beside Kira and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched at the touch, but did not pull away. Her amber eyes, when she finally opened them, were filled with a sadness that no child should ever have to carry. They want to take me back, she whispered. I heard the guards talking outside the door. Daniel felt his heart crack. They are trying, he admitted, because he had promised himself he would never lie to her. But we are fighting them, Kira. Lisa found a law that might help us, and the council is listening. Why are you doing this? Kira asked, and the question seemed to carry the weight of the entire galaxy. You do not know me. I am nothing to you. Why would you risk everything for a cub that your own species has no reason to care about? Daniel sat down beside her, and was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the right words. He thought about his own childhood, about the father who had abandoned him, and the mother who had worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. He thought about the family he had never managed to create, the relationships that had crumbled under the pressure of his career. When I was young, he said finally, I used to dream about someone coming to save me. Someone who would look at me and see something worth protecting, even when I could not see it myself. No one ever came, and I learned to survive on my own, but I never forgot that feeling of waiting, of hoping, of believing that somewhere out there, someone cared. He looked at Kira, at this tiny silver cub who had been told she was worthless, and had responded by destroying the very machine that condemned her. "You did not wait," he said softly. "You did not hope. You acted. You looked at that scanner, and you decided that it did not get to define you. That took more courage than anything I have ever done in my life." Kira stared at him with those ancient amber eyes. "But why me?" she asked again. "Why did I smell safety on you?" Daniel smiled sadly. "I do not know," he admitted. "Maybe it was chance. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was something neither of us can understand. But it doesn't matter why it happened. What matters is that it did happen, and now we are in this together." He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "I cannot promise you that everything will work out," he said. "I cannot promise that the Council will rule in our favor, or that the Velthari will ever accept what you did. But I can promise you that I will fight for you with everything I have, for as long as it takes, no matter what it costs." Kira looked at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and placed her small paw in his palm. Her fur was soft and warm, and her fingers curled around his with surprising strength. "Okay," she said quietly, "I will trust you." 3 days later, the tribunal reconvened for its final session. Daniel stood before the assembled representatives with Kira beside him, her small paw gripping his hand tightly. Lisa had prepared his statement, but when the moment came to speak, he set her notes aside. "I am not a lawyer," he began. "I am not a diplomat or a politician. I am just a soldier who has spent his whole life following orders and trying to do what is right. But standing here today, looking at this council, I realize that sometimes doing what is right means breaking the rules." He looked down at Kira. This cub was told that she had no worth because a machine could not find a match for her genetics. She was told that her existence was a mistake, that she belonged to no one, that she had no future. And instead of accepting that verdict, she smashed the machine that had condemned her and chose her own path. He raised his head and met the eyes of every representative in the room. The Velthari measure worth through genetics. They believe that DNA determines everything about who a person is and who they can become. But humans measure worth differently. We believe that a person's worth is determined by their actions, their choices, their courage in the face of impossible odds. His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Kira has shown more courage than anyone I have ever known. She chose to fight for herself when no one else would. She chose to believe in her own worth when her entire species told her she had none. And when she needed someone to stand with her, she chose me." He took a deep breath. "I am asking this council to recognize that choice. I am asking you to grant Kira asylum under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact. And I am asking you to let me be her family, not because any scanner matched us, but because we chose each other." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the representatives began to cast their votes. The vote was closer than anyone expected. 7 species voted in favor of granting asylum, 4 voted against, and 1 abstained. The final tally gave Daniel and Kira a narrow victory, but a victory nonetheless. Administrator Cole read the official ruling in a voice that carried throughout the chamber. By a vote of 7-4, this tribunal has determined that the minor known as Kira qualifies for asylum under Article 7, Section 12 of the Galactic Compact. She will be placed in the legal custody of Commander Daniel Harris of the United Earth Forces, who will serve as her guardian until she reaches the age of majority as defined by human law. The Velthari representatives erupted in fury. Ambassador Resk rose from his seat and pointed an accusing claw at the council. "This is an outrage. You have just declared war on 10,000 years of Velthari tradition. There will be consequences for this decision. Mark my words." Administrator Cole met his gaze without flinching. The Galactic Compact exists precisely to protect individuals from traditions that would harm them. This tribunal has made its ruling, and it will stand. If the Velthari wish to appeal, they may do so through proper channels. Resk stormed out of the chamber with his delegation close behind. The other representatives began to disperse, some offering Daniel quiet congratulations, others avoiding his eyes entirely. It was clear that this decision would have political ramifications for years to come. But Daniel did not care about politics. He did not care about consequences or appeals or the angry letters that would surely flood his inbox. All he cared about was the small silver cub standing beside him, her amber eyes wide with disbelief. "Did we win?" Kira asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in days he allowed himself to smile. "We won." Kira stared at him for a long moment, as if she could not quite believe what she was hearing. Then her face crumpled, and she threw herself into his arms with a sob that seemed to come from the very depths of her being. Daniel held her tightly as she cried, his own eyes burning with tears he refused to shed. She had been so brave for so long, and held herself together through fear and rejection and uncertainty. And now that it was finally over, all of that emotion came pouring out in great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "I have you," he whispered, stroking her silver fur. "I have you, and I am not letting go." Lisa watched them with tears streaming down her own face. She had worked tirelessly for days, researching laws and preparing arguments and fighting bureaucratic battles, and seeing this moment made all of it worthwhile. "Come on," she said gently, touching Daniel's shoulder. "Let us get her home." Home was Daniel's quarters, a modest apartment on the human section of the station that suddenly felt much too small for two people. But Kira did not seem to mind. She explored every corner with wide-eyed curiosity, touching the furniture and examining the pictures on the walls, and asking questions about everything she saw. "What is this?" she asked, pointing to a framed photograph on Daniel's desk. Daniel picked up the picture and showed it to her. It was an old image, faded with time, showing a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. "That is my mother," he said. "She passed away a long time ago, but I keep her picture to remember her by." Kira studied the photograph with solemn interest. "She looks nice," she said finally. "I think she would have liked me." Daniel smiled. "I think she would have loved you." The months that followed were challenging, but also filled with unexpected joy. Daniel had to learn how to be a parent, which meant figuring out what Velthari cubs ate, and how much sleep they needed, and what to do when Kira had nightmares about the scanner. Lisa helped when she could, and Kate stopped by regularly to check on Kira's health, and slowly, gradually, they built something that felt like a family. Kira started attending the station school, a multi-species institution, where children of a dozen different races learned together. She was nervous at first, afraid that the other children would reject her the way her own people had. But she quickly discovered that most of them did not care about DNA scanners or Velthari traditions. They just wanted to play. She made her first friend within a week, a human girl named Amy who was fascinated by Kira's silver fur and thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They became inseparable, spending every afternoon together, sharing secrets and stories and dreams. The Velthari kept their distance from Daniel and Kira, as High Matriarch Selvra had forbidden any contact between their people and the cub they had rejected. But not everyone agreed with the High Matriarch's decree. Sometimes, when Daniel walked through the station with Kira, he would catch glimpses of Velthari watching them from a distance, their expressions unreadable. One day, about 6 months after the tribunal, Daniel received a message from Elder Torvak, the younger male who had suggested running the scan again. The message was brief and carefully worded, but its meaning was clear. Not all Velthari believed that Kira was worthless, and there were some who hoped that one day things might change. Daniel did not respond to the message, but he saved it. Change took time, and he was willing to wait. That evening, he stood on the observation deck with Kira beside him, watching the stars drift by in the endless darkness of space. She had grown in the months since coming to live with him, not just physically, but in confidence and joy and the simple knowledge that she was wanted. "Dad," she said, and the words still made his heart skip a beat every time he heard it. "Can I ask you something?" "Always," he replied. She was quiet for a moment, her amber eyes reflecting the distant lights of the galaxy. "Why did you choose me? You didn't have to. Everyone told you it was a mistake, that I was not worth the trouble, that you would regret it. But you did not listen to any of them." Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. It was one he had asked himself many times, usually late at night, when Kira was sleeping, and he was alone with his thoughts. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the ceremonial chamber?" he asked. "You said I smelled like safety. You could not explain it, but you knew it was true. Something inside you recognized something inside me." Kira nodded slowly. "It was the same for me," Daniel continued. "When I looked at you standing in front of that scanner, I felt something I had never felt before. It was not logic or reason. It was deeper than that, older than that. I knew, without understanding how, that you and I were supposed to find each other." He looked down at her with a smile. "You asked me why I chose you, but the truth is, I think we chose each other. Whatever force brought us together, whether it was chance or fate or something else entirely, it created something real. We are family now, Kira, and nothing will ever change that." Kira was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned against him, her head resting on his arm, and together they watched the stars. Across the galaxy, the Velthari continued their traditions, their scanners humming in ceremonial chambers, their cubs matched by code and genetics. They believed their way was the only way, that blood determined belonging, that machines determined worth. But on a small station at the edge of known space, a human and a Velthari cub had proven them wrong. They had shown that family was not about DNA, or compatibility ratings, or ancient traditions. Family was about choice, about courage, about two broken souls finding each other in the vastness of the universe and deciding to heal together. Kira looked up at Daniel with her ancient amber eyes, and in them he saw everything he had ever wanted: purpose, belonging, love. "Thank you for choosing me," she whispered. Daniel kissed the top of her head and pulled her close. "Thank you for smashing that scanner," he replied. They stood there together as the station turned slowly through the darkness. Two small figures silhouetted against the infinite stars. Proof that some bonds went deeper than genetics, deeper than tradition, deeper than anything a machine could measure. Family was not found in DNA. Family was not assigned by scanners. Family was chosen. And Daniel Harris had chosen Kira forever.